Hey everybody, it's Ryan from Pi Records, and I'm here with Jim from the Tikiyaki Orchestra and Tikiyaki 50. How are you, Jim?
Good. How are you doing today?
Very good. I've been researching and listening to the music for the last couple of weeks since contacting you. Um, Tell me where it all started. It started with surf music, but you really got into the tiki culture and exotica.
Yeah. Um, I moved from New York, where I grew up, to Los Angeles in 1995, and I wandered into a store called Wacko, which was called the Soap Plant slash Wacko. It's kind of a pop culture store and an art gallery type of thing, and I stumbled upon a fanzine called Tiki News, and coming from the indie rock community, metal and indie rock and all that, I loved fanzines. So I was like, huh, fanzine, actually, let me get one. Um, so they looked like this, you know, Tiki
Yeah.
News. And I'm like, huh, half a fold and staple fanzine, type of thing.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, they have a fanzine for Tiki? Like, wow. And I started reading it, and then I had to go back, of course, and get every issue they had. I think they were up to like issue 13 or 10 or something. I don't remember. The last two or three of them were in color, but I got into Tiki News, and then I started getting into Tiki from there. And, mostly it was focused on, back then, was, all the old restaurants that were closing and the ones that were left and how it all started. And then, of course, Sven Kirsten. This was Otto von Stroheim's fanzine. That's what he started with. And then Sven was one of the contributors. And then, of course, he came out with the Book of Tiki, and then it's all exploded, massively since then. But this is 1995. So I bought all this Tiki News, and then a friend of mine had told me about a band called the Blue Hawaiians, who played right up the street from where I lived in Hollywood, called the Lava Lounge. It was Tiki, one of the only Tiki bars, new Tiki bars at the time. So I heard about them, but I'd never gone to see them. And I was on a trip to New York with my other band, Fuzzbubble, that I was in. And I was in a record store, and I heard their version of Hawaii 50, which is Martini 50, playing in the record store. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Who is this? And the guy said, that's this band called the Blue Hawaiians. And I'm like, oh my God, they play up the street from me every Sunday. Like, I've never gone. So I immediately bought the CD, went back, and then started seeing them. And that was kind of my impetus for, really getting into surf music. I started buying a lot of surf CDs, and a lot of it was, Telstar and that kind of, not necessarily surf, but in early instro and the Rhino compilations, surfing hits and all that stuff. And I started, Manor Astroman. I found all these bands, Manor Astroman and all this stuff. And uh, I got into it, and I started seeing the Blue Hawaiians on the regular. And I said, you know what? I would love to do that with a little, because they're more of an exotica style surf band. They have a lot of exotic, they're not straight up surf all the time. So I, from reading Tiki News, I started reading about, they had a music section in there, album reviews. I don't know sure if they're in this one, but some of the later ones had album reviews. And they were talking about Martin Denny and Arthur Lyman. And then I said, that's the real music of Tiki. So I got into that. And then when I got into that, uh, I started thinking about, I was also, um, this is around 2000 now, where I'd gotten my first Pro Tools setup. And I said, I would love to record an album of this stuff by myself, because I could do most of it. So um, I kind of took that Blue Hawaiian sound, added some exotic instrumentation, vibraphone, and percussion, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And the first song I came out with was called "My Ties on the Moon." It's on the first record, and then I just kind of went more into the exotica direction. And I said, well, I was on a message board called Tiki Central, which was, your basic message board all about tiki. And I saw that there were very few new bands playing this kind of music. So I said, there's an audience here. If I make a CD, maybe I can, market it to this audience. So that's kind of what I did. I made a couple of tracks and then I made a full CD and started advertising on the banner ad on the top, coming soon. This is 2007 now.
Wow.
Uh, start advertising, coming soon this summer, Tikiyaki Orchestra Stereo Exotique is what I decided to name the record. And I put the record out in the CD out in 2007. And by then I had been kind of part of the Tiki Central community. So, um, I put those banner ads up and lo and behold, it worked. A lot of people, like I said, there wasn't really that many people doing exotica. There was a lot of surf bands, but not really exotica. So that is kind of how it started. And then a couple people contacted me about wanting to play, you know, and I never really planned on putting a live band together because I knew I needed 6, 7, or 8 people to do what I was doing. But a few people seemed interested. So I said, you know what, maybe it's possible. Maybe because I've been in bands my whole life. You know how that goes. Bands are tough to keep together, let alone to find 6 other people that would be interested in this really kind of marginal, very obscure kind of music. But I managed to do it. Went through a lot of people before I found the right lineup, and we ended up playing our first gig in April of 2008. So that's kind of how it got started. So that's how I got into it. It was really the Blue Hawaiians were my gateway drug to all of this, And then I ended up getting Gary Brandon, a steel guitar player for the Blue Hawaiians, to play on the first record and eventually join the band. So that's kind of how it started.
Why? What is so significant in your mind about My Ties on the Moon that drew people in?
I don't know. I guess it's a cool song. It's kind of got the surf, but it's surf guitar oriented. You know, um, but I added vibraphone and other instrumentation, so it kind of bridged a little bit of the gap between surf and exotica. And when that was the first song I did, and then I decided to try, you know, more a song without guitar at all. So let's see if I could do the exotica instrumentation. And I was really into Esquivel. So the second song I came up with was Exotique, which has no drum kit. It's all percussion, vibraphone, really cheesy bachelor pad organ and lots of bongos and that kind of thing. So that I really was a big fan of Esquivel. So I kind of brought that sound into it. And then I started merging them. And I wasn't really into exotica enough to know that I wasn't really doing it the correct way, which is, no drum kit, percussion, upright bass, vibraphone, piano. You know, uh, I was adding steel guitar and surf guitar and mixing all these kind of influences and instrumentation. And I didn't really know I was doing it wrong. And in that way, when I say wrong, the original Exotica bands were usually 4. Martin Denny had 4-piece. Arthur Lyman had 4-piece. There was no guitar in it. There was no drum kit in it. They would have a percussion player who had a cymbal, but there was no kit. And there was no steel guitar in it for the most part. I mean, hardly at all. There was Hawaiian music that had vibraphone, but it wasn't really the exotica groups that were of the day. So, and not really knowing what was the right way to do it, I kind of came up with the Tikiyaki sound, which was to add all of those things. And, depending on the song, use guitar, use piano, use organ, whatever it was. And that's kind of how I came up with the sound, just by not knowing any better, just saying like, oh, that would sound good with a guitar. That would sound good with piano and vibraphone playing the melody or whatever, you know. So that's kind of how it happened.
Awesome. So, what is it about tiki that the tiki culture that got you interested in kind of exploring that lifestyle?
Um, I'm a fan of all things mid-century. So, I like mid-century modern homes. I like mid-century modern art and design aesthetic. I like a lot of the music. A lot of that kind of lounge culture that kind of there was a big swing culture that happened in the 90s that I liked it, but I wasn't really into swing dancing or anything like that. But the music and the aesthetic, especially the graphics and definitely the sound of the music. I like the fact that there was no singing. Um, that was an interesting idea to me altogether, was to do instrumental, and that's kind of what I said. For years I had thought previously that it would really be cool to do an instrumental solo record of that kind of music. So that's kind of what sparked my interest. And when you would drive around Los Angeles, and sometimes you would see little remnants of the old tiki apartments or restaurants and things, but it was mostly what Sven Kirsten refers to as the de-evolution period of tiki, where everyone was ripping the stuff down, closing it up, bulldozing it, and place like the Kahiki got bulldozed in the 90s, I think, or the early 2000s. These amazing giant palaces of tiki, restaurant and bars were just getting destroyed, just bulldozed over. So I I like the preservationist aspect of it, and I just love stuff from that time period. It was the time period from 10 years before I was born up until about the time I was born. So the early '60s. So I just have a real interest in it. America was kind of this place that was going places at the time, and a lot of that mid-century post-war boom kind of was getting taken, destroyed, by the '80s and late '70s and '80s. So it's retro culture is, I guess, an easy way of putting why I like tiki culture. I like a lot of retro culture. Tiki's one of them. You know.
If for our surf viewers who are not familiar with tiki culture, explain it for them.
Well, it was really tiki. There was a pre-tiki period where it was more Hawaiiana. You know, the 30s, 40s, the 40s really, and then and Don the Beachcomber started with the cocktails, and it was really a cocktail thing. And then after World War II, a lot of the soldiers coming back from the Pacific Theater in World War II, my dad was in World War II and was in the Philippines and came back, went through Hawaii, saw Honolulu when it was 4 square blocks and it was grass huts and all that stuff. So a lot of the soldiers came back and they loved the South Pacific, and of course the film South Pacific, all of that stuff. So the tiki, the icon of the tiki, was a big part of it. And then I guess in the '60s, late '50s, '60s, 1959, Hawaii became a state. So air travel opened up to Hawaii, and Hawaii became the place. And then you had in the late '60s, you had Hawaii 50, and all this fascination with Hawaii, and tiki was part of that. So there were tiki restaurants. This is early '60s, was more the Trader Vic's, Don the Beachcomber, and like tiki restaurants. In the late '60s, early '70s, the Chinese restaurants started installing tiki, and the tropical drinks and all that, and that just became the thing for a while until it just didn't. It wasn't cool anymore. Um, so a lot of it's from the post World War II era up until 1970, the late '60s, and then it started to get phased out for other things. So
Okay, okay. So,
you know,
was moving to Los Angeles from Long Island. Was that a conscious thought that you wanted to go where the music was?
yes, I definitely had gone as far as I could go in Long Island, trying to do a career in music. I went to in 1994. I went to an audio engineering school because I got tired of not getting the guitar sound I like, and the sound of my recordings of my bands. So at the end of 1994, I finished the music school and I moved out. I said, well, I will I'll get a job in a studio. This way I'm not having to work a crappy minimum wage job. I can do something better with my life. And, that's kind of, I got interested in that. And I said, if I want to take music seriously as a career, I got to get the hell out of Long Island because, no one made it off of Long Island. Very few did. And it's a small place. And I reached my, limit, with it. So, and I always, I wanted to move to Los Angeles prior to that, but there are a bunch of personal reasons why I didn't get to do that until I did. So yeah, it was definitely to be near the music business, as it were. So
Awesome. So I'm sure being out there, you frequented surfing Sundays at the Huntington Beach Pier.
I did later, once I kind of learned about what it was, you know, um, until that time I was real like when I moved out to LA, um, I was really into power pop. So I had a power pop band. We got signed to a big record label, did all that whole thing. I was around a lot of, at the time in the mid 90s, the power pop community was uh, really big in Los Angeles. And, it's kind of like I hung around with a bunch of those people. And, one of those people, Darian from the Wonderments, who became the band leader for the Brian Wilson band, I think he had told me about Esquivel and said, you got to check out this guy, Esquivel. These records are really cool. Uh, so I was into power pop, but a lot of the power pop people were into that kind of old lounge music and stuff like that too. So, there was a lot of, sharing of different kinds of music. Um, sorry, I forgot what the original question was. Um,
Surfing Sundays.
yeah, Surfing Sundays. I didn't go to that stuff until because it was in Orange County, and when I moved to Los Angeles, I kind of stayed around Hollywood. I'm like, man, Huntington Beach, that's really far away. Now I live here, now I live, 5 miles down PCH from uh, the pier. But I didn't start going to those until way later. I didn't even know about them.
So what was the band called that you were in? The power pop
Fuzzbubble.
band.
The band was called Fuzzbubble.
And this describe how that evolved um in, into like, was it completely different, or was like the exotica kind of on the on the sideline for you at the time?
Well, it was at the time when I moved, you're talking 1995, we got that started kind of in it was just a demo tape that I did as an engineering project with my singer. I moved out there in 95. Uh, a friend of ours had an independent record label, said, I would love to do a record of this stuff. The end of 95, we did that record. 1996, the three guys, the singer and two, a bass player and a drummer that we decided on, all moved out to Los Angeles. We got the big record deal later that year in 97. So I was mostly into the power pop thing then. But like I said, on one of those trips back to New York, I heard the Blue Hawaiians. And, I was like, wow, that's really cool. I want to do something like that, thought for later. We ended up getting Gary Brandon from the Blue Hawaiians and Tikiyaki to play on the Fuzzbubble album that we did, big budget, major label record. We got Gary to play on one song, and I kind of kept in touch with him. And when I was making the Tikiyaki record later, I messaged him and emailed them and said, hey, would you be interested in playing on this? I got this project. And he said, sure, send the tracks, let me hear it. So, but between Fuzzbubble and that, Fuzzbubble is just kind of a retro type of band from a different time period. So we were really into the Beatles and Cheap Trick and that kind of thing. So we were very Beatlesque, kind of a harder version of the Beatles, more alt rock version, Beatles and Cheap Trick, a little Foo Fighters. So I've always been into the older music. So that was just a different kind of retro. And then when that whole thing kind of ended around 2000, 2002, maybe, the guys moved back to New York. The label, we got dropped from the label. We got ourselves dropped. The label did nothing for us, got us on a soundtrack, but that was about it. And I was like, well, uh, that was the best, power pop band I think I could find myself to be in. So I played in a few other things, but I got more into the recording, had a home studio, and decided to try doing this instrumental stuff. I think My Ties on the Moon was probably written and recorded around 2004, maybe. I had that song kicking around for a while. And then when I really got into the Tiki thing in, 2004, 2005, 2006, I decided to, I was like, well, I want to make a record of this now. I really like this stuff. And, but again, I hadn't gone into see a lot of surf bands yet, that came later. So,
So, upon me reading various news articles, visiting your website, listening to your music, both the Tikiyaki Orchestra and Tikiyaki 50, I read that Tikiyaki 50 is kind of like the stripped down version of the orchestra. And I was very curious as to how you approach translating a huge arrangement like the orchestra down to the surf music, which is completely excellent.
okay. So the thing with the 50 started out as, I gotten to had to get rid of some guys that were in the orchestra, band problems. So the vibraphone player had to go, percussion player gone. Um, and then our drummer that we had, he had a brain tumor he had been battling for a long time. He was on again, off again. And then in 2013, he passed away.
Oh,
Um, so we had to find a new drummer. Of course, that was really hard. And we found a drummer, but that was all we had. We had basically myself, John Paul Ballack, the bass player, Brian Caston, the keyboard player, and we got this new drummer, Pablo Baza, who's in the band now. And rather than wait to find the rest of the instruments, I said, you know what? Let's see if we could take the orchestra stuff, strip it down, and because they're good songs. Let's see if we can do stripped down versions. So that's what 50 started as. So I think the first 50 gig was, I don't know if it was New Year's Eve of 2013 or just at the end of 2013. We did a New Year's Eve gig, but um, that's what started out as taking the orchestra songs and truncating the arrangement. And we did that for a while, and then I started to write songs specifically for 50 and said, let's do 50 as its own thing, because we started to get members. We got, a vibraphone player, we got a percussion player. So I decided to make Tikiyaki 50 its own entity, write songs specifically for it and record. And we did an EP, and then a second EP. And 50 now, we play some songs by orchestra, but we have a lot of 50 only songs. And that's really just either two guitars or guitar and keyboard, bass drums, a little more surf oriented, still very exotic. We do exotica songs, but surf style. So instead of using vibraphone and all that, we'll use some keyboard, and I'll play a lot of the melodies on guitar. So 50 is more like an exotic surf band, and the orchestra is just in a straight up exotica band with elements of surf, because we do have surf guitar in orchestra. So it 50 kind of evolved out of necessity for just getting out and being able to play, because it's like, well, we can't play because we don't have all the people. I said, well, let's just strip it down, call it something related but different, and that's kind of how that evolved. So now 5/0 is its own thing, orchestra is its own thing, and I would say 5/0 takes some of the orchestra songs. We do play them, but the orchestra doesn't really do any of the 5/0 material. So
Are both still active as we speak?
yes, yes. So just completed a new or Tikiyaki Orchestra album, which time flew by, and we hadn't put out the last record we put out was in 2015. So I was like, wow, I better get on this. So we did a full orchestra record. 5/0 has been just been playing, people, and that's the other thing, people to hire the orchestra, it costs a lot of money. There's a lot of people, a lot of equipment. You need a bigger stage, all of that stuff. So 5/0 became very easy for us. Like, hey man, I want you to play in my backyard. Okay, four of us, easy. Fit in a small bar like the Tonga Hut in North Hollywood, easy. We can't fit the orchestra in there, but 5/0 we could squeeze into a corner and still have a great time. And it's a little more upbeat. It's a little more rock, I guess you would say. But um, so yeah, so we're both active. The orchestra plays less because you need that big stage. You need a bigger audience. This costs more money because I got to pay more people and haul lots of instrumentation. And right now, we don't actually have like a vibraphone player per se. We have a guy that we use, but they're all hire guys. We don't rehearse with them every week.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's a bigger undertaking to do the orchestra, but to me, more rewarding. I prefer to play. I wish we could just play with the orchestra all the time because I love the fact that I have a vibraphone and keyboards and percussion and steel guitar and all those different instruments can take the melody. Whereas with orchestra, most of the melody, most of the like kind of heavy lifting in terms of the melody of the song, I have to do, and it gets it gets kind of exhausting after a while to have to do it all. A lot of it. My keyboard player does some. He plays some melodies and stuff, but there's a lot of guitar, and I don't always want to be playing guitar. I like playing organ. I like playing percussion. So with orchestra, I get to kind of not take on all the duties of the main parts of the song. Vibraphone could take a melody, piano could take a melody. They could both. I could play a guitar and vibraphone melody together, things like that. So it's a lot more fun to have all the different sounds, going on around me with orchestra. So
Awesome. Before we started the interview, we were talking about how you get your sound
yeah.
and your guitar, which is unusual for you in surf music. But why don't you give us a look at that and explain why you use that particular guitar?
Okay, so I have this friend of mine, knew I was doing a Tikiyaki thing and said, "Hey man, check this out. It's a Schecter, believe it or not. Schecter, mostly known for metal guitars.
Yeah,
Um, but the good thing about that is metal guitars got to be really playable. You know,
yeah,
um, it's got a vintage look to it, but it plays like a modern, uh, more like a Gibson style neck. There's a very
mm,
flat neck radius, which for me, uh, I tried. I got a Jazz Master, and I just had a hell of a time trying to play it. The neck radius is very curved, and I don't know. I just had a hard time playing it. This is really easy to play. It's got the toaster pickups in it, so it's got coil splits. I can get single coil,
yeah,
double coil, and any variation. Um, and it's got the Bigsby, which is not the greatest bar. It's not super floaty, but it does what I need to do, and I get a pretty nice tone out of the thing. I mean, I've gotten a lot of compliments in terms of, wow, man, that thing sounds really cool. And I just use a Fender Vibrolux reverb amp and some pedals. I don't have a tank. I did put a surfy tank in my Vibrolux. I got rid of the Accutron that was in there, and man, that thing was a massive improvement. Uh,
awesome,
so, but
awesome.
that's my setup. It's some pedals and the Vibrolux reverb and this Schecter. I also use a Gretsch, like one of those Korean Gretsch, Brian Setzer hollow bodies. for the jazzier stuff for the orchestra, and you always have it as a backup. I'm just so used to playing this Schecter right now. I mostly use it, but for the jazzier, the real jazzier sound and stuff, the Gretsch works sounds better. This is a little, more solid body of a feel. That's a deep hollow body. So,
This past summer, I was lucky enough to get the chance to go to SG 101 convention,
mhm,
um, and hang out with Jeff and the guys.
right.
And it's like being in Philadelphia. It's like you're on a different planet out there. Like the culture and the music. It's all about just living, like being in the moment and living. And it was just so refreshing from how the East Coast is. Do you know what I mean?
It's why I moved here.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, I have a weather dictated personality. If the weather's really crappy, so am I. So, miserable person to be around. So I got the hell out of that. For me, when I moved to California, I felt like, it feels like you're on vacation every day.
Yeah.
Even your daily chores, like if you're in a crappy mood, just walk outside. It's beautiful out. Right now, it's beautiful. It's like, it's like almost 80 degrees outside right now. I live, uh, less than a mile to the beach. I could walk there. And for me, that quality of life, they call it a sunshine tax. It's very expensive to live here. So I don't have a big house or anything. I live in an apartment by the beach. Um, but that a quality of life and my mental well-being is more important to me than having a giant house and all of that stuff in the middle of, whether it be the East Coast or the Midwest or whatever, where it's maybe cheaper to live. um, yeah, I always feel like no matter how bad it gets, you can just walk outside and most of the time it's a perfect day. So that affects, and that's why I think why the tiki thing is so big here. I mean, it was really a Southern California thing, but you go to San Diego and parts of San Diego and parts of, here, the beach areas, you really kind of feel almost like you're in Hawaii. So, sign me up for that all day long. You know what I mean? Um,
Awesome.
and yeah, so lots of shows outside. You could have shows outside and almost rarely ever have to cancel because of weather. Um, and yeah, you just get that great that feeling that surf music really um, kind of conjures up is in the daily lifestyle here in California. That's why I love it here. So,
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about or that I haven't asked that you'd like to mention?
um, well, we do have a new record coming out, Tikiyaki Orchestra. Um, it's going to be out early next year because it was done recording months ago, but vinyl, so everybody wants vinyl, so we're putting it
Yeah.
out. We have to wait for the vinyl to come out. It's coming out on High Tide. On The vinyl's coming out on High Tide. uh it'll also be available on CD on my label Future Primitive and streaming. um we have a really famous artist doing the cover. I'm not going to say who it is yet, but um the cover so far, what I've seen in the cover art, it's really cool. It's going to be a nice bitch and gatefold sleeve, colored vinyl, all of that. The album is going to be called Tropica, is the title we're going on right
Oh,
now.
nice.
Tropica with a K. And yeah, so that'll be out early next year. It'll be our first record in 8 years. So I don't know why it took that long, but it did. And yeah, that's the full 7-piece orchestra. Gary Brandon's got playing some steel on there. And of course the guys, Pablo and John Paul and Brian and different vibraphone players. I played some of the vibraphone myself. I have a set of vibes. Um, so yeah, I'm super excited about that new record. I'm really happy with it. And we do have new 5.0 material we've been working on, but we haven't recorded any of it yet. Probably, the 5.0 EPs, we have two of them. Usually a bunch of covers, and some original songs. So I'm not sure if I want to wait to do a full album or do another EP. I think I want to do a full album this time. The other ones have been 6-song EPs, kind of easy to do and put out. But
Yeah.
that's it. New orchestra record in the early next year. And 5 will probably be playing more shows, and orchestra hopefully will be playing some shows as well. And that's basically it, you know.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for lending me your time.
Thank
Um,
you for
and
having me.
I really enjoyed learning about your music, both bands, because there's just so much going on and so much. I don't know, just by reading the articles, it's just such a rich history that you lived, and you know, it's kind of like sometimes I'm stuck on the East Coast, but wish I was there.
Well, we're always here. Just come visit. There'll always be something to see. There'll be some surf band to see. They're playing all the time, you know, and this SG 101 and Tiki Oasis and a ton of other things. There's always bands playing. So we have a pretty good scene going here right now for that. So
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jim. Have a great night.
thanks, you too, man.